welcome to today's episode of Tomorrow's Leader, where we dive deep on all things leader related to leading yourself and leading other people. I am John Laurito, your host, with a fantastic guest here today. I am super excited, and given her busy schedule, I am incredibly honored to share some time with Dr. Hayes-Jordan, who has a remarkable background and a series of accomplishments, one of which being the nation's first Black female pediatric surgeon, amongst many accomplishments. But Dr. Hayes, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, John.
Yeah, my pleasure. There's so much that I want to talk to you about, and I know we've got an audience of listeners that's really anxious to hear your story. So maybe that's a good place to start, because we've certainly got a lot to talk about. But maybe you can share with the audience a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of get into some of the incredible things that you've done and how you've impacted the world around us.
Sure. Yeah. I was born in Los Angeles, California, and I left there after high school. A very well kept secret is that I graduated from Beverly Hills High School. I don't like to tell people that much, but it wasn't because I lived in Beverly Hills. It was because there was a minority program where they allowed very people with certain grades to get in, sort of as it was a college. So I left LA and went to Dartmouth for undergraduate and medical school. And I did my undergraduate and medical school at Dartmouth, and then went back to California for my surgery training. So for surgeons, we do 5 years of training to become adult surgeons and operate on adults. And you have to do an additional 2 years to get another certificate in pediatric surgery. So I'm double boarded in adult and pediatric surgery. I did an additional 2 fellowships, one in molecular biology. So I have a laboratory where I do genetic research on very rare tumors. And I also did an additional 2 years of pediatric surgical oncology. So my specialty really is pediatric surgical oncology and taking care of cancer in children, surgical cancer in children. So that's sort of the training it took. You know, after I graduated from medical school in 1991. I did 11 years of training to become what I do today, which is a very specialized surgery. And as you mentioned, I am the first African American female pediatric surgeon who's board certified in this country, and that has been part of the journey, but has resulted in me having a position now that I really enjoy.
That's tremendous. Now, when was it that you knew that you wanted to work with kids and in particular cancer? How did you get drawn to that?
Well, you know, that's an interesting story because it's interesting how God works in your life. So I was a student at Dartmouth, and I thought I wanted to be a surgeon. I knew I wanted to be a surgeon. I decided that when I was a third year medical student. And in order to get a position in surgery, you have to go through what's called a match process, where you apply to a bunch of hospitals and they interview a bunch of people, and then the computer matches the list. So the hospital gets their top choice and the applicant gets their top choice. So as a fourth year student, you sort of can spend that time, that's our last year of medical school, you can spend that time going to places to sort of show off so that you can match there in your residency program. So I wanted to go to Stanford for my residency. So I flew all the way from New Hampshire to California and had arranged to do a 6-week sort of mini internship, if you will, at Stanford to sort of show off and tell them that you know, show that I was great and that they should choose me. When I got there, now this is before the internet, and many of your listeners may not remember this time, but it was when you had paper mail. So I received a letter that said, you know, come be here on this day. By the time I got there, it was several months later. And the administrative assistant said, you know, I'm sorry, we have too many students on the general surgery team. You're going to have to choose a different team. And you have two choices, either pediatric surgery or orthopedic surgery. And I'd already done an orthopedic surgery rotation. So I chose pediatric surgery, but very reluctantly. I was very disappointed. I wanted to be on the adult surgery team, and I did not want to be on the pediatric surgery team, but I didn't have a choice. So I ended up on the pediatric surgery team, and the second day I fell in love with it. And it was a phenomenal experience. My boss at the time was a pediatric surgical oncologist, a very well-known pediatric surgical oncologist. And that's how I got interested in pediatric surgical oncology, because that's what he did. And I'd spent that couple months with him on that team. And his name is Stephen Shockett. And so fast forward, Dr. Shockett became the chair of surgery at St. Jude. I'm sure you know St. Jude, John, the Children's Cancer Hospital. So he became chair of surgery at St. Jude from Stanford during the time I was completing my training. And after I completed my training, he invited me to come train with him doing pediatric surgical oncology at St. Jude's Children's Cancer Hospital. And so it's sort of serendipity. That time frame that I just described was about 10 years, actually, from the time I met him to the time I went to St. Jude to train. So, and who would know that that would turn out to be what I needed. The reason I ended up training at St. Jude was because I didn't match in pediatric surgery. So no one would hire me as a pediatric surgical trainee. And what I found out over time was that they didn't have any, there was no other Black female pediatric surgeons, and they were reluctant to train me in this country. Just a few seconds on how training works in surgery. So in surgery, there's several hospitals that have training programs that have been accredited. And at this time, this was in 98, 99, and 2000. And in that time period, there was only about 21 programs in the entire United States that were training pediatric surgeons. So there were 21 positions in the entire United States. So I applied the first time, I didn't get in. I applied the second time and didn't get in. After the second time I didn't get in, that's when Dr. Shockett asked me to come do training there for 2 years. And then I applied the third time and didn't get in. And ended up getting a, you can imagine how disappointing that was along the way. But I knew that God had put me on this earth to do pediatric surgery, and I was not going to stop until I got there. The United States medical system is very connected to the Canadian medical system when it comes to trainees. So the Canadian pediatric surgeons had 5 positions, and we had 17 positions to make up the 21 I was telling you about, 22 positions. So we were all part of the same pool as far as the match. And one of the positions in Canada was not filled by a Canadian, so they offered me that position. So I got training and then came back here right afterwards. So it all worked out.
So, but it took you 3 times. Was it the third time that finally got you in that program? Wow. So, and as you're talking, I'm realizing, I'm thinking, wow, you were just, it was almost like fate. You were meant to be in pediatric oncology and doing what you're doing. It was almost, it sounds like that was not in your mind until that letter or that trip out to, California told you that, you were not, the plans had changed, so to speak. It's interesting. And I think Steve Jobs, I think, was the one who talked about it's hard to connect the dots looking forward, but it's easy to connect them looking backwards and realize how things happen and why they happen. Do you ever think about that and say, wow, you know what? Everything did kind of fall right into place. But it took a lot of work to do that, though. It was, the signs were there, but you really had to push hard to get in there and do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even now, even today, being recruited from MD Anderson Cancer Center here to University of North Carolina Children's Hospital, now looking back on where I was, 14 years ago and how I got here, everything had to fit perfectly to get me to where I am now. So I think Steve Jobs is absolutely correct. You can connect the dots very easily once you're looking backwards.
Yeah. Were there decisions that you made or certain things that you thought were small at the time that you look back and you're like, wow, had I not done that, then I wouldn't be where I am right now? Or the little things like that ended up being big?
This was not quite a little thing, but I had a patient at St. Jude that had this rare disease that is now the focus of my practice and my research. And meeting this particular patient, obviously was more than serendipity. And this was back in 1999. And I met this patient, and he had this very rare cancer. And I was told by the people who were teaching me in the hospital that there wasn't any cure for it and that he was going to die. And when you go into surgery, surgeons have a common personality in that we all go into surgery because we like to fix things immediately. You go into the operating room, you have a problem, you fix it. When the patient wakes up from surgery, the problem is fixed and you move on. Um, when we can't fix things in the operating room, we're not only frustrated, but often angry and sad at the same time. So this 12-year-old boy, we opened his abdomen and he had so many tumors in his abdomen, 300 tumors that were innumerable, really. And the surgeon I was learning from said, it's too much disease. We can't help this child. And then we just closed him back up and we didn't do any surgery, actually. And I had to go tell the mom that there was nothing that could be done and the child wasn't going to survive. That's not a feeling you want in surgery. It's different from medical doctors because, I mean, no doctor wants to tell a patient bad news, but in the medical field, you're managing diabetes or high blood pressure or something that's chronic and long-term. It doesn't necessarily get fixed, quote unquote, it just gets managed. But for a surgeon, we like to fix things, and I wasn't able to fix this child. So that got me immediately interested in why we couldn't fix this child. And fast forward from 1999 to 2017, when I published the manuscript that showed that had improved the survival in this rare disease from 10 to 20% to 60%. So who would know that meeting this child in 1999 was going to result in this major change in outcome of these patients in 2016?
That is unbelievable. And, it's a remarkable thing that you've done. I think about that one child, that experience, that your interaction with that child, and as unfortunate as the outcome of that was and how difficult that was for you, that put you on a track to now change lives. I mean, how many lives do you think have honestly been saved because that success rate or survival rate has gone from 10 to 15% to 60%?
Oh, wow. Well, it's hard to know because along the way, it's a very rare disease, first of all. There's only about 100 to 150 cases each year in the whole United States, a couple cases per state. So it's very rare. But along the way, I've taught other surgeons the technique, and I've taught other doctors how to recognize the disease, and I've taught other doctors how to approach the disease as far as a treatment pathway and doing chemotherapy first and then doing surgery and then doing more chemotherapy and radiation therapy. So some of the patients I've touched, I'll never know the numbers because they were touched through other doctors and not directly through me. But I've been around the world to many different countries teaching the technique, as well as to several different states in the United States teaching the technique. Switzerland, Russia, Switzerland, Moscow, Germany, France, Australia, and several states in the United States as well. So the patients that have encountered those doctors since I have taught them are probably innumerable. I never like to say that I saved anybody's life because God saves everybody's life. I just sort of show up for work and do what I'm supposed to do, and God takes it from there. But I think I've operated on a couple hundred patients over the years, over a couple hundred patients. And, we always say in pediatrics that you save the life of a child and you save more than just that patient's life. When adults are saved from whatever illness, they've lived their life most of the time. They've had their children if they're going to have any in their past childbearing age, usually. But if you save the life of a child, you save generations because that child's going to grow up and have children, and those children are going to have children, et cetera, et cetera. So saving the life of one child really saves generations. So even if I've only saved 100 or 120 of those 200, those children are going to go on to have their own families. And so it becomes exponential.
Wow, that's got to make you feel amazing. And it sounds like a lot of your time is spent doing and performing surgeries, and a lot of your time is spent educating and teaching other doctors. What is that? I mean, that is that a pretty even split now in terms of impacting patients directly and also impacting them indirectly through other doctors, or you spend more of your time doing one over the other?
Not quite an even split, but I am a tenured professor. So as a distinguished professor, that gives me the responsibility of teaching, and also uh, recognizes that I have taught quite a bit in the past. Um, I do surgery 1.5 days a week, 1 to 1.5 days a week on average. I run my laboratory, the molecular biology laboratory, a few hours a week, and then I have a significant amount of administrative responsibility as the surgeon in chief of the Children's Hospital, and I'm also the division chief of pediatric surgery. But I spend many hours per week teaching and answering emails from other surgeons or doctors that are asking questions on advice on how to manage their patients. Um, I probably spend quite a bit of time, 10 to 20 hours per week, depending on the week, doing teaching and things like that.
Wow, that's amazing. And was that something you had in mind years ago, or is that just a natural outcome of all the great work that you've done that you're now in that position?
I always wanted to be a full professor. I knew I was going to be a full professor. You have to sort of work your way up from assistant professor, associate professor to full professor. So I knew I wanted to teach as part of what I did. I came from my mother, both my parents are teachers. My whole family, really, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandma, grandpa, all teachers and professors at some level. So it was sort of in my blood, so to speak. I knew I would be teaching part of the time, and I knew I would be doing surgery and also learning. Teachers are always learning too. Every time I go to another hospital to teach, I learn something else. This week I'm traveling to Michigan to teach them how to do surgery. And I received an email the other day from Australia about going back and doing some more teaching in there. So
Mm-hmm.
it's quite gratifying, and but it is quite time consuming as well.
So on that note, let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges because I'm just envisioning your life and your world. I mean, you've got so many things going on, and obviously incredibly important things. You're teaching, that's leadership. I mean, you're the surgeon in chief at UNC Children's Hospital. You're really you have so many people that are looking to you for advice and for guidance and everything. I mean, what are the biggest challenges that you face? What's the toughest part of that role?
I think the toughest part of the role is that I don't have enough time to do everything I want to do. There's only so many hours in the day. There's mentorship that I enjoy mentorship. There's high school students, junior high school students, medical students who look up to me as a surgeon, look up to me as a Black female surgeon, and I'd love to spend time talking with them and providing leadership in that way. But there's just not enough hours in the day. It's hard to fit everything in. I work about 12 to 13 hours every day, but Monday through Friday. But it's challenging to fit things in that I enjoy doing. It's just a lot to do, and leadership is a part of it. And I'm learning how to be a leader. I'm still learning. I came from MD Anderson Cancer Center, where I was the leader of a small division of surgeons, and now I've grown in those responsibilities. And as you lead more people, your skill set needs to change. There's a title of a book, I'm forgetting the author. This is "What Got You Here Won't Get You There."
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how it is. All the skills that I learned to get me to this point now are going to be different skills than I need to get me to the next point.
That's a great point, and that's something I talk to leaders about all the time. That it's not a destination; it's a journey. Learning how to be a great leader, you've got to be in it for the ride and enjoy that journey because you never get to a point where you feel like you know everything, and you're at that pinnacle. But on that note, what would be some of the things that you look at that you regard as most critical traits or skills that a leader needs to have? And maybe even in the context of today's world with everything that's happening now, what would you say today's leader, or more appropriately for the title of this podcast, tomorrow's leader needs to have?
Yeah, I think the characteristics for tomorrow's leader is one of which is transparency, is being transparent and honest with the people who are following you, and walk the walk, as they say. Be who you're asking them to be. Be an upstanding, ethical leader who's creative in their thinking. My gift that I bring to leadership is I'm able to think very clearly on the spot and come up with creative solutions to problems. I think leaders have to be able to have creative solutions and manage change. Managing change is critical because you go into any leadership, anything in leadership in an organization, a company, a hospital, and there's going to be change. Something's going to happen, a pandemic. Something's going to happen that's not going to be an expected part of the process, and you have to be able to manage change.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to come up with creative solutions to manage that change. And then the transparency, which is the other part of it, that transparency comes from knowing who you are as a leader. I have to understand who I am and how I relate to the world. I am by nature an introvert, and so I have to learn these extroverted skills, and you have to know who you are as a leader. And part of knowing who you are, you mentioned the times we live in 2020, is understanding what your implicit bias is and understanding where your blind spots are, so to speak. So if you can understand where your blind spots and where your implicit bias may be, that's helpful. I have implicit bias, and I've learned what that is so that I can walk in my world and try to avoid acting on your everybody has implicit bias. Some people, something simple like a color. I love purple, and I gotta be careful that I don't buy everything purple.
I love purple too.
So somebody says some other color is pretty, I'm going to say, no, it's not. It's not purple. So I mean, I think leaders today really have to understand who they are in the context of this world, so that they can manage people with transparency, and we all feel, hopefully, that we treat everybody equally and everybody is treated with dignity and respect. And in the medical field, that's even more important because we want patients to feel comfortable in our space. And so the last thing you want is for a patient or anybody to feel like they can't go back to the doctor's office because they're afraid of the actual doctor, and then they get more ill. So we have to be really self-conscious in the medical world about making sure we're managing our implicit biases. And now that the awful things have happened this year with George Floyd and everything else, we've gotten to get a lot more training in that. And all the hospitals across the United States are making it a priority to train the physicians and nurses so that we can be the best we can be.
That's great. Well, there's, I think about, and a couple of comments on what you said, which I thought was fantastic. Talk about blind spots. I mean, I get a lot of leaders that ask or wonder, okay, well, how do I know I have blind spots? Or if I acknowledge that everybody's got blind spots, how do I figure out what mine are? I mean, what's your advice to them? How do they do that?
Ask someone who's worked with you for a while, who you trust. A lot of the things I've learned about leadership, I've learned from bad leaders, or leaders that are not bad intrinsically, but have done things that are detrimental to their leadership. Mm-hmm. And so I'll say, oh, I don't want to do that. So if someone would ask me, for example, I had a leader who was very micromanaging, was very, why aren't you at this meeting? Why are you at this meeting late? And in medicine, there's competing responsibilities. You have patients, you have meetings, and sometimes you might be a little bit late for a meeting if you have a critical patient need. that you have to tend to. There's several different competing. So you as an adult have to manage your time. You don't want a leader who's saying, "Why aren't you here right now?" And I don't see you. And you're like, wait a minute, I know what I'm doing. I got to manage my time the way I know that it makes sense with my responsibilities and what's urgent or emergent at the time.
Hmm.
So I think asking the people around you who work with you, they'll tell you your blind spots. They'll tell you, it's painful.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I went through a 360-degree evaluation a year ago, and it's a little scary to look at the comments,
Yeah.
but they're always accurate. So,
Well, that's a great point. I mean,
you
that's
know,
a lot of
or-
times leaders don't seek advice or feedback, and the answers are there. But a lot of times I think it's almost like somebody not going to a doctor because they don't have symptoms. They don't know they may need to go to a doctor, and they have a reason very much to go, but they just don't even know. And the same thing I think for leaders and people that want to lead themselves or lead others better. There are ways and clear ways that they can get better, and you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes you need somebody else's guidance to tell you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just finished a course called Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine, and that's one of the things. The first thing they do is they say, okay, you've got to get this 360-degree evaluation, and just the process of asking other people to criticize you is a
Mm,
little bit scary.
yeah,
You're
vulnerable.
thinking, I think I'm doing a good job, but maybe I'm not. And but once you're able to hear about that, once you're able to see it in writing and understand what they're saying, you go, oh yeah, I guess I do that a lot. I got to stop doing that.
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
and people
so
are willing to give that feedback too. It's not it's not for lack of willingness to give it. It's just sometimes they're not going to do it unless they're asked to give it to you. So you're right. That's a great valuable exercise. One of the questions I want to ask you, you talked about change, and obviously you've been through, you talk about how things have changed so much, and, paper letters versus now everything's email, text, and everything. And I know how I lived in that world before, working before, voicemails were even around, or obviously certainly cell phones and computers. Um, in this day, there's so much changing at even a much more rapid rate. And a lot of this comes down to leading yourself through change. You've got so many people, hundreds, if not thousands of people that react to your ability to manage change and lead yourself through change. How do you do that? Or what would be your advice to people? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how you view change, whether it's good or bad, and how you kind of navigate through that and lead yourself mentally so you don't go into a bad place in regard to it.
yeah, managing change and leading through change is challenging, because we're human beings, we're adult human beings, and we're sort of set in our ways. And one of the statements I keep in mind is the only person that likes change is a wet baby. It doesn't, adults don't like change. So no one's going to like you as you lead through the change.
Yeah.
And so I don't expect people to like me, but I do expect everybody to be heard. The first thing I do when I'm trying to lead through change is get everyone around the table, literally, figuratively, and literally, to discuss what they think the problems are. And they may not see the problems like I see them, but I need to understand their way of thinking so that I could try to bring them around to my way of thinking, that I think is best for the institution or best for the patients, or fill in the blank. But you first have to get the right people around the table, to make the decisions, who can manage the change, and then everyone has to be heard. Now, that's difficult in itself because in any group of individuals, there's always someone who, and in your sphere, everybody knows that there's one person who wants to talk all the time. And then there's one person who never talks. And then there's another person who's always angry. And then there's another person who's always happy all the time. So you as a leader have to manage the conversation so that everyone gets heard, and not just the person who's more talkative or more of an extrovert. So understanding the personality differences and hearing everyone. And then what I try to do is try to start with one or two things that we could all agree on, make it something very simple and very broad, and say, can we all agree on this? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, how about, can we all agree on this? and then get more and more granular. And then when you get to the place where you don't agree, try to identify, go back to, okay, here's what we agree on. And then in the parallel column, what are our goals? Like what are we really trying to, we as the group are trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to get to this goal, then we're going to have this change, or what other alternatives are there?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I often try to stack the deck, and I'll say, okay, we can do this, this, or this. And usually the third one is what I want to do, what I think is the right thing to do.
Uh-huh.
And the other two are obviously not going to work.
Yeah.
So you can sort of stack the deck that way. But
You want them to make that decision versus you
you want,
saying, hey, it's answer number
right,
3, but I want you
right,
to come to that conclusion.
right. So I sort of bring them to that conclusion, which I know they're probably say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, well then this is what we have to do.
I like
Um,
that. Yeah. So then you get more buy-in from them and they feel a sense of ownership to the decision, even though it came from you, really. You laid it out in a way where they connected the dots and ultimately they were part of that decision. They don't feel like it was
exactly,
dictated to
exactly.
them, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. So finding commonalities and identifying the common goal, I think, are critical, and then trying to bring them to that conclusion slowly, and not expecting that it's going to happen fast. Change doesn't happen quickly.
Yeah.
So you have to expect that it's going to take some time.
Yeah, that's great. And that's such a great way to put it is find that commonality, that common goal, ground everybody toward that. And that helps, I would imagine, them understand what's most important. Granted, there may be some discomfort in this change, but it's all toward the same common vision. And then they may not like it, but they understand it at least. Is
Right.
that what
Exactly.
I'm hearing you say? Okay.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly correct. They may not like it, but they understand it. They
Yeah.
understand why they're doing it, and it's okay. Everybody, I think that when you're managing change, you have to accept the fact that everybody's not going to agree. They just have to understand that it's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they have to not disagree, but everybody's going to agree. I tell them at the beginning, I don't know, we're not here to get consensus. We're not here to be, well, in agreement. I just need you to understand the issues and be not sort of go against what we're doing. Don't disagree, but
Yeah.
you're not all going to agree.
That's a great point. What's your view on risk taking as a leader?
Yeah, so risk taking is also very personality dependent and very institution dependent. Um, Certain businesses may be in a position where they're always taking a lot of risk, and some institutions may by nature have to be risk averse if you're dealing with life and death. So it depends on the situation that you're in. But when you're deciding what the risk is, and what I do in medicine, it's always a risk benefit ratio. We always take risks. I take risk every time I put a child to sleep in the operating room. And I, on a daily basis, have to communicate risk to my patients and the families of my patients. So, something as simple as a hernia repair that I think is simple is still a child's life that's in my hands. Something as complex as 300 or 400 or 500 tumors that need to be removed in a 16-hour operation is complex. But my responsibility is to communicate to the patient and the family the risk that's involved, but also the benefit that would be involved. And at some point, one may outbalance the other. The risk might be too high, so we shouldn't do the surgery. Um, but if the risks are lower than the benefits, and the benefits way outweigh the risk, that's when we move forward with making that decision. So I think giving people the information on what are the risks and what are the benefits can help in that decision making process.
Okay, that's helpful. And then people ultimately feel they're more, and that's transparency to your point before, also of letting people understand whether it's parents of patients or patients themselves, or it's people that work for you in an organization. They understand what's at stake and also what the benefits are if we do it right. And here's what happens. Here's what the cost and the sacrifice might be, but here's what the outcome can be.
Exactly. That's exactly right, John.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's good. You've been, obviously you're a pioneer. I mean, you've done things that nobody else has done, and that requires stepping outside, I'm sure, your comfort zone, because you're doing things that you're getting in uncharted waters and into new roads and everything. How hard or easy was that for you to do that? And is there a way that you kind of push yourself to step outside your comfort zone when you sense that you're up against it?
Yeah, being outside your comfort zone is always challenging. I think what keeps me, everybody has their center and their focus. My center happens to be God. I happen to be Christian. And so that's what keeps me sort of grounded, not sort of grounded, keeps me grounded. And when you're going through what I was going through, as far as not being accepted into a training program for pediatric surgery, and you're going through that time, you have to have something that grounds you. And so for some people, it's, marathon running or biking or meditating or yoga, but whatever it is, you have to use that to get back to your center, um, before you can sort of move out of it. And you can't let other people define who you are. Um, the sticks and stones may break my bones, and words will never hurt you is wrong. Words are very hurtful, and so you have to be able to manage other people's words by understanding that your success, who you are, is not dependent on who other people think you are, or who other people think they know you and they don't know you. One of the individuals who didn't hire me as a pediatric surgery trainee, who was the chair of a department of surgery, said, "We just can't take a chance on a Black woman." And having that, I can't let that statement define who I am. I know I am a Black woman, but I'm also an outstanding surgeon, a very intelligent individual, et cetera, et cetera. There's a long list of things that I am. And so you can't let anybody tell you who you are. You have to know who you are. And you have to live through a lot of sometimes negative things that are said about you or to you, that may be said to your in your presence, or they may be said behind your back, but you still have to know who you are in this world and how you relate to the world around you. And I think once you're grounded in that, you're not going to sway based on what someone's saying about you or not saying about you.
That's fantastic advice. I love that. You've got a lot of people. I know we're short on time here, so we're at the close. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you. For those listeners that are in awe of you and what you've accomplished and are thinking themselves about their future, and whether it's leading themselves or leading other people, any last words of wisdom that you might give to somebody, or piece of advice?
Um, I just don't give up. I know I guess that's the Jimmy V statement, but you can't give up on yourself, and you can't give up on what you're dreaming. And it just sounds so trite, but those really are true words. If there's something that you really want to do, even if it's sort of floating in the back of your head and you've always sort of thought about it, and maybe your parents or your friends or brothers or sisters or husbands or wives are saying, well, why don't you just do engineering or whatever it is? And you're thinking, no, I really want to be a writer. Um, and really just go with what your instinct is telling you, and don't be afraid. I say to my children a lot, I have a 24 and 25-year-old, the decision making becomes easy if you say, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do? And then it's, oh yeah, well, I would definitely do that. Well, that's what you should do. If you have all the money in the world, and that's, the money isn't an object, because we are constrained by our finances and our circumstances and where we're living and how much money we have in our pocket. But if that wasn't a constraint, what would you do to make yourself happy? And whatever the answer to that question is, that's what you got to do. Even if it's hard, even if it's going to take years, even if there's no one who's doing it, even if you can't find anybody else who's doing it, even if you don't know anybody who looks like you who's doing it, you still have to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that is fantastic advice. I love that. And that's a great way to wrap. I know we're at the top of the hour, and this has been absolutely fantastic. If people want to either learn more about you or maybe help your cause. How can they do that? How can they connect with you or learn more?
Yeah, I have an email address and I have a Twitter handle. Twitter handle is A Hayes-Jordan, MD. And I can give you my email address so you can post it so they can see it.
Yep, we'll do that.
And reach me by email. That would be fine as well. I would
Okay,
love that.
perfect. Well, this has been fantastic. I can't tell you how appreciative I am for you joining, and hopefully we get you back another time. That'd be great.
All right. That's
Yeah,
wonderful. Thanks, John, for having me.
thank you.
That's really wonderful.
We've been here with Dr. Andrea Hayes-Jordan, Surgeon in Chief of UNC Children's Hospital. Thank you for joining us today on today's episode of Tomorrow's Leader. And as always, I appreciate your feedback, your likes, your subscribes, your shares, your comments, all that kind of good stuff. And go down below, go to that 5-star review. Leave your thoughts, of course. I appreciate that as well. Thanks, and appreciate your time today.